And helping us dissect these issues are Dr. Nancy Booker, who is an assistant professor in the multimedia journalism at the Graduate School of Media and Communication at the Aga Khan University. Together with her is Mutegi Njau, who worked at The Nation for 24 years before joining Citizen TV in an editorial capacity. And we also have Eric Odor, a regular on the show, who's the Kenya Union of Journalists Secretary General. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're also waiting for Dorothy Kweyu, who is formerly a revised editor of The Nation, and now she's a freelance journalist and a consulting editor. So I'll start with you, Eric. What was the most memorable story for you in 2018?
Yes, when I was invited to this show, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this show. When I was invited to this show, I was remembering what happened in January, end of January, the switch off of major television stations in this country. And I've seen you actually highlighted that as one of the major events in this country, because that is actually was the darkest moment in the history of Kenya. Never ever we've ever seen police officers and the government officials going to transmission sites to switch off television stations. So I think that goes into the history as one of the most absurd day in the history of the media in this country.
Okay. Dr. Booker, what stood out for you in 2018?
A couple of things, but I think for me the fact that we had headlines that broke away from the everyday politics, health made it as a lead story on several occasions. For me that was a big plus. And the fact that there were lots of stories on corruption was also a plus. In terms of how those stories were treated, that's a discussion for us to have. But I think for me the shift from just everyday politics to issues that touch on society, particularly healthcare, making it to the front page was a big highlight.
Any particular story on health?
There were stories around KNH. There were mainly stories around the KNH, what was happening at KNH. That for me was big.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Mutegi, what about you? What stories stood out for you in 2018?
I think the big one for me is that we had, at one time we had two presidents. One the people's president and the president of
that would be January the 30th.
Yes. And then of course the closure of the TV stations, and because it was so terrible. Even when there was the issue of Magadian and the Standard was raided, it wasn't as impactful as that. And even then, when there was the issue of digital, it was the
migration, yes.
Yes. But that time when we had the two presidents, and the editors were called at State House to be advised not to run that thing live. Some succeeded, some didn't. And unfortunately, some people lost jobs. So to me, that was very critical.
Okay. All right, let's look at those pictures before we get into that discussion substantively. Those are the events of January 30th when Raila Odinga was sworn in as the people's president, and the three major media houses paid the price. Okay, we'll come back to that. I asked you, the three of you, what your most memorable stories were. Let's now look at what the man on the street had to say.
The story that I followed the most this year was about the results for the Class 8 children. Now, the media focused so much on the children who got good marks. My concern is what happens to the children who are not lifted shoulder high? What happens to the children in the rural areas that got good marks? And the media really doesn't concentrate on them.
Accident that happened in Londiani, that was actually on, I think it was on Boys Pass. The issue was actually very difficult for most of us to observe it, in the sense that the way those number of Kenyans lost their lives, it was actually very difficult for all of us to comprehend it.
Because of course I come from Osingishu and I'm also a farmer, I will not forget issues concerning maize. And so please, we request that you do something concerning the maize issue. The coverage of that story, of course, was good. I believe that the press has done good, but probably somewhere in the government, they are not telling us the truth concerning the maize scandal. But the press are doing a good job.
The story that I have been watching this year, that I have been following, start for Mary Sharon Otieno, and I would like to make my comment on media that actually you have been covering very well. I have really enjoyed your covering. It has actually been reaching us clearly, and actually we have been getting the real story. It's just because of you.
Story ya Obado ilinibamba kwa vile governor, sio jambo la kawaida kuona governor anashikwa, analala gerezani, anapelekwa kotini. Hii haijawahi tokea Kenya hii siku nyingine tena, ama duniani sijasikia kwingine. Yale ambayo governor alipitia ama ile mkono wa sheria ulituonyesha ya kwamba hakuna aliye juu ya sheria.
Memorable story ambayo nakumbuka ni ile ya watu ambao walisombwa na maji katika ile dam tragedy. Alafu niliona watoto wengine wakisombwa na maji, nikaona vibaya, lakini niliona wengine walikuwa na upendo, mwingine akasikilia mwingine, akamshika vizuri mpaka mwisho hawakuchukuliwa na maji. Hiyo ndio memorable story naweza sema kwa mwaka huu.
Ile story mimi nakumbuka manze, wakati Deputy Chief Justice akishikwa. Si jambo la kawaida kuona mkubwa wa Supreme Court akipelekwa mahakamani tena kwenda kushtakiwa chini wa wadogo wake. Hiyo kitu halikutupeleka vizuri, lakini tunadhania siku ingine mambo kama haya yakifanywa tupeleke zile koti za huko nje ndio kweli utapainika kabisa.
Ni ile handshake rais wetu Uhuru Kenyatta na Mheshimiwa Raila Amolo Odinga walifanya. Kwa hii jambo, kwa sababu Kenya ilikuwa imewaka moto, kwa hii jambo vile walifanya, saa hii Kenya imetulia na hata imefanya former prime minister amepewa kazi. Tunashukuru.
Ya Matiang'i. Na okay. Matiang'i amefanya kitu poa kwa kuweka matatu, watu wanakaa watatu. Then overloading ilikuwa mob. Kwanza hiyo njia kutoka Kisii mpaka Kilgoris. Kitu tunahitaji sasa awaambie hao watu wa matatu ni kupunguza bei. Juu bei yao huwa iko juu sana.
My memorable story ni kuhusu exams, mambo ya Amina Mohamed na Mr. Matiang'i wamefanya katika hiyo sekta vizuri, ambayo inafurahisha sababu initially katika hali ya mtihani ulikuwa unachukua muda mpaka unapata utanganyifu unaingia ndani, lakini at the current moment unapata mtihani vile mtu amefanya ndivyo matokeo yanatokelezea na kwa mapema kwa hali nzuri. So na huwa sekta sote kila mmoja angechangamka afanye vile wao wafanya, tungefurahia na nchi ingesonga mbele, ingesonga hatua kuliko pande nyingine.
Those were their memorable stories from 2018. I want to know what you want to read, hear and see more of in the news in 2019. Share your thoughts on @NTV Kenya, @Presspass KE, and my handle is @Obarrows. The hashtag is Presspass. Please share those thoughts with us. And logically, it makes sense to start on January the 30th. When the big switch off happened. So these are some of the news stories that were carried on that particular day.
Wakenya watasalia kukosa matangazo kutoka kwa runinga za KTN News, NTV na Citizen TV baada ya serikali kutangaza kuwa televisheni hizo zitasalia kufungwa hadi uchunguzi wanaofanya utakapokamilika.
After 7 days of blank screens for local viewers, there was partial respite after the government nodded to the resumption of broadcast by NTV and KTN this evening. But for viewers of Citizen TV and Inoro TV, the wait for a reunion with their favorite TV programs continues after the government left the two stations literally in the dark with no explanation officially given for the apparent discrimination.
I did promise that one more guest would be joining us, and that is Dorothy Kweyu, former Revised editor at the Daily Nation. Now you're a consulting editor as well as a freelance journalist. Which stories stood out for you in 2018?
Obviously, the swearing in to Uhuru Park, and definitely the handshake, the Sharon murder definitely stood out for me, and I would definitely pick on those three as the most outstanding stories.
Why would you pick the swearing in, for instance?
The swearing in at Uhuru Park for me was extremely significant, and while there is a view that perhaps it should just have been ignored, I personally think that something very strange happened in that swearing in, and it showed what our leaders are made of, you know. And by that I mean that at the moment when Raila Amolo Odinga went to Uhuru Park, and there was a mammoth crowd. I think I watched the swearing in on telly. I didn't dare to go there physically. It was a mammoth crowd. And I say so because I had also watched the swearing in of the president at Kasarani, and personally, maybe it is visual illusion, there was no comparison.
One can even ask if there was no swearing in of the people's president, which, as she says, was attended by million people, would there have been a handshake?
Okay. My question to you then, given the high price that the media had to pay, 3 of the major broadcast houses had to pay, do you think, so it wasn't a mistake for them to take that risk, defy the president and cover it live?
Newspapers, before the state is supposed to be independent. They had been asked to, here, I wasn't at the meeting, not to cover it live, but they couldn't cover it. Probably the government thought there would be skirmishes, there would be fighting, or they would walk to State House, whatever. But it's not the business of the government to tell the media what to cover or not to cover. Their business was to stop the swearing in.
Okay.
If they stopped the swearing in, would they have told us not to cover it?
All right, Dr. Buka, even on national security grounds, they could not have asked us not to cover it.
National security?
I think the move was ill-advised and highly regrettable, because what it did is that even for those who did not want to watch it, or those who don't want to pay attention to it, just that move itself drew a lot of public attention to it. And in an era where, you know, social media is what people are paying attention to, people were streaming what was happening live. So we missed nothing. But the downside of you know, some of these switch-offs is that then it provides room for a lot of speculation and a lot of fake news as well, you know, because when somebody is, when someone is streaming, or, you know, we are relying on other platforms for that information, then it provides a lot of room for, you know, for fake news to flourish. So it was very regrettable. It did not change, you know, people's perception. It did not reduce the attention that people gave to it. In fact, it actually pushed people to that story, because everybody wanted to find out, okay, you know, why such harsh a harsh reaction, you know, from the powers that be.
Okay.
It was also transgressive in the sense that the government wanted to go back to the Moi times, when Moi would call the nation and say, "Mimi sitaki hiyo story ya huyo wangu iandikwe." You cannot give instructions like that. That is backwardness.
Okay.
If they closed because of the active that was happening in Uhuru Park, they send it to a criminal matter. So you don't cover. When people are killed, when criminals do the act, don't we cover them? Because that was the argument.
Okay.
It was a crime taking place, so we didn't have to highlight it.
All right. Okay, Eric, my question to you is, at the time, there were those who said there was no public outcry. when these media houses were switched off, and that the media now is no longer relevant. I get my news off of Facebook. There are people who did say that I get my news off of Twitter, and it doesn't matter if they're off or on. What did you think of those views that were shared then?
I usually say that sometimes Kenyans make statements out of convenience, because if you look at, even if you go online, you'll realize that people who say that they rely on social media networks to get their news, they go to the mainstream media, or what we call the legacy media, for verification. Because the news is all about credibility. You can get that news on Twitter or on Facebook or Instagram, but how credible is that? So they'll always rely on the traditional media to verify that information, because the news that is aired, printed by the newspapers or television stations, they're actually professionally done. That is different from what you'll get from social media networks. But having said that, if you look at what happened at Uhuru Park, there were both parties, that is the opposition and the government, they were in a dilemma. If you read the stories that actually came out after that, you realize that even the opposition, within the opposition itself, politicians who are working with Raila Odinga, even them, they were in a dilemma. They didn't know how they are going to handle it. And some of them, actually, apparently, they were going to be called by Nigerian lines. So that tells you how the dilemma they were in, how you switch off your phone, then the phone is off. Then again, you're expecting a call. So it tells you the dilemma that even people in opposition were in. It's the same dilemma that even the government was in, because first of all, they had a meeting with senior managers in the media, just trying to prevail upon them so that they do not give live coverage of what's happening and what was going to happen at Uhuru Park. Then thereafter, when this did not happen, because actually the Editors Guild, then the chair of the Editors Guild actually was able to come out, Linus Kaike was able to come out very clearly and tell the Kenyans that there is a plot between some editors and chief executives of media houses and the state to ensure that Kenyans are denied the opportunity to follow what was going to happen at Uhuru Park.
But if you recall, there was another statement that followed that statement from the editor-in-chief of KBC, who said Linus's statement did not speak for all the editors.
Yeah, that's an editor actually who found himself irrelevant because of that statement, because you cannot contradict a statement that has been made by the chairman out of consultation with other members of the, because these institutions and the positions we hold them in trust of members. So therefore, you cannot go out there and counter what members have said, because Linus was speaking on behalf of members, and actually he has been vindicated of what happened, because what he said actually came to pass, that actually the government went to Uhuru Park, people went to Uhuru Park, and the government went to transmission sites and switched off the signals of major television stations here to stop Kenyans from accessing information, because that is guaranteed by the Constitution. By the way, I must also caution that this matter is still alive in court, and one of the cases that is there, actually the government has even been sued for contempt, because when Okiya Mtata went to court and got the orders,
I recall he was given a very hard time serving them to the communications authority.
But even despite that, even when he eventually managed to serve the government, actually they did not switch on the television station signals.
Okay. All right. So we take a short break on that note, but when we come back, I want us to look at why there wasn't more of a public outcry. Welcome back. You're watching Presspass, and with me in studio to dissect the media's performance in 2018 is Eric Odor, Dr. Nancy Buka, Mutegi Jao, yes, and Dorothy Kweyu, formerly revised editor, Daily Nation, and now a freelance journalist and a consulting editor. And you two were saying you used to work together back in the 80s? Yes, Mutegi and Dorothy?
We used to work together. We are doing investigative stories together.
All right. So before we went on the break, we're discussing the events of January the 30th, which was a switch off first of NTV and Citizen, followed by KTN. And I asked a question, and that was, why wasn't there more of a public outcry? Because I remember there was a lot of sentiment online that we get our media, even what's his name, the gentleman who heads the copyright, not the copyright board, the classification board, Ezekiel Mutua, was saying, he went on record and he said, I get my news off of Facebook and Twitter. But why wasn't there more of a public outcry, Dr. Buka?
I think this introspection that we're doing now needs some context. And the context is that, you know, the public, a huge percentage of the public was very disappointed with the media coverage of the election last year. And I think that's where, you know, the rain started beating us, because they had expectations. We had made promises as media regarding how we were going to cover the elections, the tallying and all that. So when that didn't happen and the election was contested and the events thereafter, you know, the public lost trust. A huge percentage of the public lost trust. And, you know, there was a whole question about what are the issues that we are paying attention to. If you remember, one of the hashtags that has been trending for the longest time has been Githeri Media. And that's where it actually comes from. So there was, you know, there's a huge population out there that feels that we betrayed, or rather the media betrayed the trust that they had bestowed. And so that could have been part of the reason why, you know, that public outcry, as we would have wanted it, you know, to the degree that we would have wanted it, did not seem to happen. Having said that, were there people who were dissatisfied, and did they express themselves? Yes, they did. And that shows you, you know, the power of the media. But I think one of the most important things that this, you know, that whole scenario paints for us is that because of that shutdown, or I mean the switch off, the fact that the international media was able to cover it, the fact that people were able to stream live, the fact that people were looking onto their social media platforms to find out what was the latest, and people were updating each other. Those who were at Uhuru Park were updating those who were at home, points to something that we cannot ignore, that journalism is no longer a self-contained manufacturing industry. You know, true, the legacy media, or the mainstream, as we'd like to call it, gives a lot of credence, you know, to issues, and we go back to it to verify, and that's the advantage that we have. We cannot sit back and imagine that we are the only people who provide news and information. A lot of information is shared on social media platforms. The question is, you know, for the public then to be able to verify, and that's the advantage that we have, so that we need to be able to look at, you know, how are we giving coverage to certain stories? What's the depth? And I think that's something that would warrant a discussion, because that's why people come to us. So do we have a place? Yes, we do. But we are not the only players in that space.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mutegi, I want to come to you next. But I just want to read one response to the conversation today, and that is Jacob Bere Matlala, who says, my rating of media performance in 2018 is 4 out of 10. In that, on coverage, they give corruption, education, and oversight, economy, infrastructure, and social coverage less than 20%, and gave 80% to gossip, politics, and slaying. Mutegi, do you think that Jacob has a valid point, that the type of coverage that we do, or the type of content that we produce, is one of the reasons there wasn't so much of a public outcry back in January?
I think there is a general agreement that the standards, not only of journalism, have gone down, whether in medicine, in what science, and what. But that doesn't mean we will not need doctors, because some doctors are, you know, not good. There is dissatisfaction with the media, yes. Even today I saw an argument about, is it today or yesterday, in the social media, about people like you. When you come here, are you intellectually able, or you came here because you are beautiful? You know, those are questions. Did you go to university? When you went to university, did you train well as a journalist? Are you able to ask questions with proper answers and listen to us? Some people feel that particular television is just showmanship. It's a drama, or they call it cool drama.
Smoke and mirrors.
Yes. So that aspect is there. But we still have very qualitative journalists and very good programs. You cannot dismiss and say, since they are not good, you shut them down. You still, there is room.
Okay.
Although maybe badly.
But this is what I'll say, that if you look at the government strategy then, and the strategy the government has always used when it wants to unleash terror on the media, it usually uses some bloggers, nowadays I'm told they are called influencers, to also try to put out some propaganda against the media, so that the government achieves its objective of trying to blackmail the media. I don't think that there was no much public outcry there. if you read and if you go online, you'll realize that the same people who are always complaining about the media, the same guys who are complaining then. But I'll tell you that people who interact with a common mwananchi like myself here, at that particular time, I could not even enjoy my meals and time and the social gatherings, because people will always ask me, Eric, when are we going to watch news on television? So I think as much as we do not see that, it doesn't necessarily mean that there was no public outcry. If you go online and go on Twitter and go to Facebook, you'll just be the same people whom, if you start interrogating their background, you'll see that the government had a hand in what they are doing and what they do online. But ordinary citizens who rely on television to get their news, actually they were surprised, and they kept asking, when are we going to get televisions back on air so that we can watch our news?
When my friend Mutua Ezekiel
says
he does not get his news from television or radio, what does he mean? How many times have I seen him all over stations? That's because he's a government technocrat. And for him being a man who is supposed to be dealing with film, to say that he doesn't, we cannot forgive him.
Okay. Dorothy, I'd like you to close the chapter on this particular discussion. Dr. Booker is one of the jurors for the annual Journalism Excellence Awards. And just last week, we had David Omoyo, who's the CEO and secretary to the Media Council of Kenya. And he said one of the concerns that was raised by the jurors was on the quality of the submissions. And you talked about in-depth coverage. Do you think that is something we need to seriously address as the media?
Definitely. Quality needs to be addressed. And of course, I really don't have an immediate answer on how that can be done or should be done. The reason being that the terrain that we are working in now is very different from the one that Mutegi and I worked in. We are working in a social media context where there is so much fear of competition that the story you are pursuing is going to be all over the place before you release it. So I think that just that fact alone has caused standards of investigative journalism to go down, because when you are trying to just get that information, you are being told, look, so-and-so is going to scoop us, and so on. And indeed, before you know it, it has come out. It may be completely off the mark, but it's still there and it derails you. So it's a discussion that we need to address, but I cannot tell you right now that I know how we are going to deal with it.
Can I say something about it?
Yes.
Apart from the training, I've been an editor for years. The training that goes on in our schools, without due respect, some schools are in the 4th floor of some house, which is about downstairs. And they are training journalists, media people. That is one aspect of it, apart from the fact of the competition being scooped. And another aspect of it is that media houses, unfortunately, are not putting a lot of money into that story, so that the story can come out well done. They spend, you always on your neck, bring my story. But there's no money, no time to do that. And like when it used to work.
We had a budget, you know, and you could actually investigate a story for a good 6 months. And when it comes out, it is earth-shaking.
Okay. Dr. Booker, you taught me.
Yes, I did.
How have you responded to that?
Yeah, and I receive a lot of flack, you know, and a lot of, you know, commendation in equal measure, you know, having trained many people. But I think when we look at the problem, it's not just an aspect of training. And we also must realize that universities or training institutions can only do so much. A lot of training also has to happen in-house. You know, that said, yes, you know, should journalism schools look, you know, also do some introspection? Yes, they are. And I think there was a discussion at the convention on Saturday, which really highlighted some of the issues that J schools are facing. And there's a lot of discussion going on even within the academy on how best to improve that. But having said that, when I talk about us looking at the problem in totality, with the changing business models within the media space, we no longer have, the guys who are doing the investigation. We no longer have journalists who are investing in time and media houses who are investing their money to be able to produce quality content. So what is it that sells? And again, who's the journalist who's working in there? There's a lot of over-reliance on freelancers, not to say that they're not doing, they're not good, but you want to have a collective mass of journalists or reporters who can actually do good stories, which take time, which take a lot of investment. We have juniorization of the newsroom today. A lot of people who have no advantage of history, and so they don't even know when you talk about depth, what's the expectation. Some of them don't understand the context, which has a lot to do with, how you write and how you package your stories. So let the trading institutions take some of that blame, but a lot of it goes into media houses themselves and the kind of priority that they have paid to, the quality of reporting. Now, if we rethink the business model, there is evidence that media houses, the New York Times, the Guardian, are good examples that people can actually pay, to receive good content. People are paying, I subscribe to the New York Times, and I'm willing to pay for that good content because I know somebody has invested in it. We can do that here.
Okay.
Yes, I agree with Dr. Buka that if you look at the history of Kenya in the past 4 or 5 years, most media houses actually want free labor or cheap labor. And if you go for cheap or free labor, definitely we'll also get cheap and poor product. So that is a problem that has been there in the media houses, because if you look at the number of senior and quality reporters who have been laid off by the media houses, it tells you that the media houses are no longer interested in investing in quality. So if you invest in quality, you'll still get quality product. Number two, when David Omoyo comes here and tells you that, the judges complained, he should also tell you that the mere fact that judges did not get quality articles for entries, it doesn't mean that we don't have quality articles out there. It means that maybe there could have been reasons why people did not make those entries with the quality articles because of probably previous experiences which have been shared. Did you submit an entry? No, I did not. And I know that from the previous entries over 2016 and yes, 2016, 2017, there were problems and there was complaints that actually came from reporters. So reporters have given up. I know there's one of the journalists actually who also won the award. Actually, she confided in me that she didn't know she was going to win because she had given up because she believed that there's only specific people who actually win those awards. So she was just trying her luck, but she was surprised that she could win.
Dr. Buka, is that true?
So that means that there are issues of perception, that people maybe could have articles out there, but they don't want to submit them for awards because of perception that they have.
Okay, Dr. Buka, is that true, though?
Do the editors encourage them? Yes. And two, I mean, there's a very clear criteria regarding, the scoring and, and who makes up the panel of judges. It's a rigorous process, one that has, done a good job in terms of recognizing, quality journalism. I think what stands out is that the stories that are worth winning are those that people have invested time and resources. It goes without a doubt. Dorothy has sat in the panel as well. So she knows that a lot of the entries that win are those that can actually see there is an investment. There was mentorship, as a person was working on the stories. You can see that it's more than just one person working to be able to put that together.
Okay,
yeah.
Dorothy, there's something else Eric raised, which was the quality of the work by freelance journalists. You're a freelance journalist. What story are you working on now, and is it true that you get what you pay for?
Right now, I would say that I wouldn't describe myself so much as a freelance journalist because of the issue of standards that we are talking about. I was recalled roughly 6 weeks ago in a consultant capacity on the revise desk where I was about 4 years ago, you know, and it is all about standards. So even though Dorothy alone cannot reverse the plummeting standards, you know, and they go across the board, reporting, news collection, and so on, up to editorial, which is where my leverage point is as revise editor or consultant revise editor. There is a lot that needs to be done. And so I can say that I'm spending more time now because if I leave, you saw when I came, that is when we were now sending the Daily Nation to press, you know, and there's a lot that needs to be done.
You see, Dorothy, like, I'd agree with what Dorothy is saying. You see, at that level of an editor, you work on what has been submitted by reporters who are on the ground. So if you have reporters actually who are working from, let's say, from the counties, and these reporters are not properly facilitated to go around the counties and come up with quality stories, to write good stories that have got no influence whatsoever from the people they are reporting about. But so long as we still have reporters who go to a news conference and then have to be facilitated by the governors and the people who control the resources in the counties, definitely you will not get an objective and a quality story. So long as you have a reporter who appears before a news source looking weak, looking hungry, looking thirsty, definitely you will not get a quality story from that reporter. So even however much magic Dorothy, as an editor here in Nairobi, would want to have some professional touch in that story, definitely she will have to work with what has been submitted by a thirsty reporter from the county. So to address the issue of quality, we must address the issue of human resource capacity in the newsrooms. Right. So that when the reporters are going out there, they are independent, they are motivated to come out with some captivating stories that are actually going to make life easier for the editors who are in newsrooms who want to turn around those stories.
And I think that point has been made. I'll come back to Dorothy. But first, another big story from 2018 was I'm not boarding. And here's a little bit of what that was like.
Where are my luggage? Where is my passport? I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. What? The captain cannot fly.
2 journalists were injured as they covered the ongoing events at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport last night. GSU officers assaulted those members of the press.
We should have used, some discernment and good judgment. Like, there was no need, like, we had already left the place. So I didn't understand why he had to pursue me very far away from his fellow officers. So he was like the only one there. And then when I fell, he continued kicking me. And I think there were visitors there who had just arrived, and there were people waiting to pick up their visitors. So it was really unfortunate.
It certainly was. And
all right. Did the media have any business camping at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport? Mutegi, I'll start with you.
Why not? There was an event taking place. Who would have covered it if the media was not there?
The argument was this is a sensitive security installation.
So
we can't have these cameras and all these flashing lights, and you can't hold your audience hostage for so many hours.
What if the people who are mercenaries were there and shooting people, or Al-Shabaab? Would you be allowed just because of Muguna? Journalists have every right to go anywhere where the events are taking place.
Okay, but was it more about the drama than necessarily the value that we would add?
That is what is that. Without drama, what was that?
Okay.
You have them to.
And again, there's a very thin line between drama and reality and real. You know, so where do you draw the line and say, now this is drama, we don't want it, you know?
But it all boils down to whoever was handling that matter, because this is a matter that was in public interest. The public wanted to know
Happening in a public space.
What's happening in at the airport. And I don't think, yes, airport is a very sensitive area, but again, sometimes we are not supposed to misuse that or abuse that by denying the public the opportunity to know what is happening there. Everybody knew Miguna was coming back. Miguna is a family man. He has people who wanted to know what's happening to him. He has followers, even if there are 2 or 3 people, but at least he has followers who wanted to know what's happening. And therefore, the media had a responsibility to tell the public the happenings at the airport. It depends on how actually the security officers handle the matter. And it was mishandled by the security officers, not the media.
Yeah,
I'll tell you a
think
story.
there was...
I'll tell you a story. Many years ago, there was a group called RPP, supporters of Moya. They were women camping at Uhuru Park. At one time, they stripped in protest of him being arrested by police. Our photographers took pictures. The question was, should we publish those pictures? We, after consultation, serious consultation between bishops and pastors, whatever, we published pictures. Why? Because those women were not strip-teasing. They were making a political point.
Wait, so you didn't lie anything?
Well, we used reasonable pictures.
Okay, use reasonable pictures.
Reasonable pictures.
Dr. Buka, you had a point to make?
No, I was just saying that, you know, I think that story or the coverage of the events at the airport then, you know, just demonstrated the intolerance on the part of the police, especially when they, you know, now went into attacking journalists who were covering, you know, what was happening. So that in itself was, you know, was not called for.
Okay, which brings us to the point of media freedom. What we had in January was the switch off of the media, and despite court orders, the government still dragged its feet in turning the stations back on. I think Citizen came on last after the 2 media houses were turned back on. And then, of course, now we have what happened at the airport at the JKIA. Since then, there have been reports of reporters who've had their camera lenses broken by security agents. We also had our Mombasa correspondent is called Karim Rajan, and he was also roughed up while covering the story of a hotel that was being put up just next to the ocean, and that had been linked to DP William Ruto. So there have been cases throughout this year that concern security of journalists and also media freedom. Eric, in your opinion, what is the state of media freedom looking back at 2018?
Actually, if you look at the media freedom in Kenya over the past 6 years, instead of gaining, actually are losing. And even if you look at the ranking by the Reporters Without Borders, IFJ, Center Committee to Protect Journalists, actually we are dropping in ranking. Last year we dropped, and this year we also expect to drop, because if you look at the switch off of television stations, the increasing attacks on the journalists, if you look at the revenue that actually are dropping as a result of political interference and commercial interference, it tells you that the media freedoms actually are going, we are going to register again a drop come next year when these surveys are going to be released, because I've already seen one, and I think Kenya is not doing very well. So what we need to do is we need to see how we can push that, because the truth is the government will never allow the media to be independent and be free. The government also has its own interests. So it's the media also to push and make sure that we are able to protect our turf, so that actually the government does not take away even an inch from us. So in terms of media freedom in Kenya, we've always been seen as the beacon of hope in the region. But right now, everybody is asking what is happening in Kenya, because we thought we could borrow a lot from Kenya. As much as we've not lost any life of a journalist in Kenya or in the recent past over the past 3 or 4 years, but that does not mean that we are doing well, because our the attacks of journalists, especially in county governments, is worrying. The access of information in county government and even the national government is worrying. A freedom of expression. If there is what is going on right now in the media, which is self-censorship. And when the media or journalists start censoring themselves, it tells you that there is something that they're afraid of, and instead of maybe suffering the consequences, they'll rather don't publish that story, and that actually also affects the freedom of the media and even the ranking.
Okay, we have to take a break, but we do have institutional memory in the room. Dorothy Mutegi, when we come back, I really want to hear what you have to say about the state of media freedom currently. Welcome back. You're watching Presspass, and I want to look at some of your comments on our conversation so far. Constant Cap says, but one important thing that the media brought out well was a feature on how Chinese are harassing Kenyans, especially with the SGR. Gadhara says, when considering why there wasn't a big public outcry, please do not ignore the fact that media owners and senior management were complicit in the shutdown. Remember the meeting at State House and the firing of reporters at NTV Kenya. I think you brought that out, Mutegi. We're talking about the state of media freedom in Kenya given the events of 2018. I'll start with you, Mutegi. What's your assessment? I mean, you've covered news stories under the Moi era, you've covered news stories under the Kibaki era, and also, I believe, during Uhuru Kenyatta's first term. What are your views on that?
We have agreed that the standards have gone down, but there is the revolution. What is happening in counties is making the journalism completely not reliable. First of all, there's corruption, both in the cities, here in the newsrooms, and with the correspondents. Many of them are in the pockets of governors and the senators, whatever. So that is a major problem in the counties. When I was a reporter, my instruction was, when I was just hired to be investigative, I was told never travel with a politician. Don't ever enter a politician's car when you're going from place to place.
Okay.
My editor would give him money to go take a matatu or to hire a car, but definitely not to enter, not to eat his lunch. But these days, it's commonplace.
Okay, Dorothy, what are your views on this particular subject?
What he's saying is absolutely true, because we worked around the same time. Indeed, it was almost taboo to be seen with a news source, you know. And unfortunately, the news we are getting is that it is now so common, and I think even the Media Council has published on this issue of corruption.
Even National Media Group publishes in its news.
That we do not take brown envelopes.
And there's a book that I haven't seen a review of yet, and unless I missed it at some point, but Ombara has written brilliantly on this phenomenon of corruption in the media. And it is so intrinsic at the moment that reporters actually laugh at their editors when they tell them off, you know. I was shocked at that a reporter can actually shut down her editor because she's saying you cannot take that. You're saying, and I think it goes back to remuneration, you know, because they say what they get there is what supplements their income. And that, if it is the situation, is indeed a sad, sad thing to happen. Because
I don't know whether it's about remuneration.
Because in essence, a journalist should get what is due to them. Investigation costs money. And if I'm going there on the rough, and I do remember that in our days, you could, in my personal case, could go with the baby, you know, in the field because it mattered, but the baby also mattered, you know. You are risking your life, you are exposing the baby, you know, as a woman journalist. But to praise the nation then, you know, they paid for it, you know. You didn't have to go to any, you know, there were fixed dues that you can take this flat, you don't have to account for it. But you can also go where you feel comfortable and bring the receipts. I thought that was pretty fair, you know, because in my case, it allowed me to be in a sensible place with my baby.
Okay, Mutegi, before I come to you, Dr. Buka, Mutegi was responding as Dorothy was speaking. You said it's not, to you, it's not an issue of remuneration.
I don't think so. If people want to be corrupt, will be corrupt, whether they're paying a million shillings or what.
Okay,
right.
Yeah,
I think
it's a question of
but
morality.
in this case, they're not being paid $1 million. So the question of remuneration, matters because you look at, who are the journalists on the ground and how are they paid? Some of them are paid per story, So and a number of them have gotten themselves intertwined with, the county governments. They're on some of them are on payrolls of the county governments. So when your integrity as a journalist is compromised, then your freedom as a journalist is compromised. You cannot be the same one who is, out to point the ills, when they paid you yesterday for something that you did. I think for us to have an honest conversation, we have to be able to ensure that we take care of the journalists and ensure that, they don't find themselves in situations where they're receiving M-Pesas from, county governments. If we lose our integrity, then we lose the trust, and that has a lot to do with how we are perceived in those spaces, and that has a lot to do with compromising our media freedom.
I don't think journalists are corrupt per se, because corruption is a problem we have in society, and what we see, and like what Dorothy has said, that she has never imagined that a reporter can tell off his or her editor, but right now it's happening. Why is it so? It is so because these reporters are learning these manners from their seniors, who are the editors in newsroom. And we've had several meetings with journalists in different counties. We've done several town halls meetings with journalists and county governments. We've done one in Mandera, we've done one in Narok, we've done one in Isiolo, we've done one in Turkana. And these journalists will honestly tell you that actually we do this because even if you don't, you send a story to Nairobi, this story again will be bounced back to the county, to the person you are writing about. And this person will laugh at you that, you thought you could do this, but at least I know what you are doing. But even having said that, the issue of remuneration is now a crisis. Actually, we've reached a crisis point in the media industry. You can imagine that still in 2018, especially in newspapers, we are still using rulers to measure stories and use that as a means of calculating how much a journalist is going to earn at the end of the month. So if you are still using a ruler in a newsroom to measure, those are the things that are being used by colonialists, then you're still expecting quality to come from that journalist. But definitely you are living in denial. Number two, but journalists have realized that, okay, fine, journalism, the media owners, they don't care about our welfare. They have now gotten jobs with the county governments. They are now the communication officers and advisors of the government on media and communication. So therefore, that journalism is now part-time. And why is now they're working as part-time in newsrooms? Because nowadays I've seen several newsrooms now actually now giving correspondents who are working in counties contracts as consultants. So when somebody has given you a contract as a consultant, it means that you are working on part-time and when and if you are available. So these guys, they have their allegiance, they pay their allegiance to the county government, who is their full-time employer. To the media, they are only working when they feel that they have time to do that. So if you do that, definitely you are also going to compromise quality. So the day you will realize that human resource and labor is a major component in media work, then we are going to get it right. Otherwise, we are still going to get the stories that we have right now, then they complain that we have a Githeri media. By the end of the day, you realize that these journalists also have got bills to pay by the end of the day. So if the county government is their full-time employer that has put them on a payroll, they know that they're going to get salary at the end of the month. When you have a newsroom that is going to use a ruler to measure your pay by the end of the month, you definitely have the legends of the
You have definitely been a good advocate for the journalists on that front. But I mean, with the conversation, as we're discussing media freedom, corruption came up, yeah? So let's look at our coverage of corruption more broadly. Dr. Booker, one of the things you said that stood out for you in 2018 was our coverage of corruption stories. Why?
I think the fact that we've had one scandal after another being, making it to the headlines, it makes me shudder, just the amount of billions we are losing as a country. My concern is that when you look at some of the stories and how they are treated, it appears that in terms of sourcing, you ask yourself, where are the journalists getting these stories? Some of them are reported, but we don't get the follow-ups. So, you get the impression that there is an aspect of media capture, by certain agencies who then give that information. But most importantly is, the follow-up of some of those stories. I think we've had so much covered on corruption, but we are ending the year and the question is, have there been any prosecutions? We hear of arrests, for example, with the sugar, with the sugar story. But, what has happened beyond that? So I think there is a lot of room for follow-up, to some of these stories, which we don't seem to be, getting, which goes back to the whole question of quality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dorothy, I want you to come in at that point. You're now working as a revised editor with the Daily Nation as a consultant, I take it? Yes. Now, there's something very interesting that Dr. Buka brought up, which is the aspect of media capture in our coverage of these corruption stories. There are those who say that the media have been turned into pawns for the investigative agencies, that we are prosecuting these cases on the headlines. Do you think that's a fair comment?
I am not sure about that, because what I know is that cases have gone to court and most of them are ongoing. And for me, the fact that these are very high-profile cases, tells me that something different is happening. Because in the past, even getting somebody to court was almost unknown. But when we see high-profile people being prosecuted, I personally, I'm not sure that I understand where the media has gone wrong here or failed, because there is only so much follow-up you can do when a case is already in court, You cannot prosecute or continue to deal with the matter that is in court. So once it is in court, I think due process needs to take place. And after the judgment, then we can say, in all fairness, whether or not we consider it to have been fair, Of course, there is also that question that you cannot judge the judge. But surely there has to be a way in which we can say something didn't come out in this case, and in the interest of freedom of speech, we have to say if we think that information was withheld or a judge was corrupt, and that has also happened.
Okay.
Judges have been known to be corrupt, and for me, even though we don't know how the DCJ's case is going to end, but the very fact that she's in court, for me, tells mountains,
Okay. All right, Mutegi, and she's mentioned the DCJ case, and I want you to comment on that. There's a particular headline that the Nation carried to the effect that her goose is cooked, and that those who argued that it's a foregone conclusion then for the media that she's a guilty party, but this is still a suspect. Do you think that we need to exercise more restraint in how we phrase our headlines and angle our stories with regard to these corruption cases?
And obviously, the court rules must be followed, otherwise we'll be caught up with this, what is called subjudice, which is a lot of trouble. But what Dr. Buka was saying was, why do we journalists of today have to wait until the CID, or whatever, DCI, and the DPP have to write a story to give you the information? Why can't you take it yourself? Because you used to do it. Golden Bag was not brought by anybody. It came from a little story that was written in Nation by Peter Orten and myself. When we got the CD3 forms, we found that Kamalev Patni was getting paid for bringing one form, Dutch marks, $4, pound sterlings. We said transaction in central bank cannot be, you can't fill a form and be compensated for that. We realized there is fraud, and then the thing broke. So I thought then, completely opposed, sending gold was being sold, until now it became a big thing. What I'm saying is, journalists of today don't have to wait for investigation from DCI or the public prosecutor.
Okay.
They can initiate it.
But to me, there is...
I have seen Kamau in the Nation. Kamau.
John Kamau?
John Kamau. He is doing a good job. In sanitation, did a good job of it. That kind of story, which is his own.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Eric. And why I was raising the question of the DCJ is because if we look at Waiguru, we carried her story day after day, day after day on the headlines. And just the other day, there was a party at which a media party she attended, and she said she talked about how the media hounded her out of office. And the reason she said that is because of the EACC report that came out, I think in September, and they said Kafura's her claims in the affidavit were not substantiated by evidence. Yet, her contention was we're reporting the contents of that affidavit as if they were fact. Do you think we are?
I think when we report these stories, we attribute them to the source document. So in this case, when journalists were covering the story, the source of the story was the affidavit. And journalists kept attributing the story to that affidavit. There's nothing wrong with that. Unless she's saying that journalists were came up with a cooked up affidavit. But so long as it was a legit document and journalists were referring to, there's nothing wrong with that. And there is also nothing wrong with the journalists working with the DCI or any other government agency that is investigating corruption cases. So long as journalists are also, again, not manufacturing the stories, so long as these stories are attributed to these documents and to these agencies, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think the particular headline you're talking about, I think it was the fall of DCJ Mwilu that was done by Daily Nation. I think we know that in a good society, in a society where there are norms, a society that people follow some very good traditions, so long as you've already been taken to a legal process like that, we've seen in other countries whereby whether you are guilty or not, actually you step aside until investigations and even the case is concluded in court. So in these cases here in Kenya, even talking about the case of Waiguru, we want a tradition whereby once someone has already been taken to court and there even suspicion, we know even other countries, the mere fact there is just suspicion alone, it is enough for you to resign and allow investigations to go on. That does not mean that you are actually guilty. But here in Kenya, we always follow this issue that you are innocent until proven guilty or otherwise. But in other democracies where people also take integrity very seriously, once you've been mentioned or you just been taken to court like what we saw, a Deputy Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya entering a police car, being taken to court and going into the dock to appear before her junior, first of all. That, first of all, is too humiliating that somebody actually in a different society would have said, no, I'm not going to be taken through this particular process, because right now she's still going before judges who are her juniors in the judiciary. So you'll expect that in that case you say that, okay, fine, as much as I'm not guilty, as much as I have not stolen anything, let me just step aside. Once you have been cleared, you can now go ahead and even sue the state. We've seen people do that. Even go sue the state for damages, or you demand your position back.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just say something that, while there are advantages to that, where it's good for a scoop, but there are also problems with that. Because then you're not
this
doing,
reliance on the DCI.
Yes, you're not doing any investigation. Armchair journalism. You're just waiting for somebody to give you some information and you publish it. So there are problems with that. It's good for a scoop, but beyond that, what's next? And I think that's what has been missing, that over-reliance on that information that's coming from somebody else's office, which then leads to some of the headlines that we're having, like her goose is cooked. That's predictive journalism. We don't know whether futuristic, as he says. So we need to be very careful about how we treat that. And it could be working now because there's a good working relationship with those in those positions. What happens when it's on the flip side? I think we want to. Yeah, let me just point.
But let me say this, Dr. Buka. Even in newsroom, I've been here in that nation, even during the time these stories were being written, but I never came across that document. So it means that as a journalist, John Kamau and Mtuma Maki went out of their way to find that document. That is what we call investigative journalism. Because these documents are not dropped here in newsroom, and they pick this document and start doing so. It means they must have a lead and use their connections and their investigative instincts to get to the DCI to get this report. Okay. That is why you never saw this report at Standard. You never saw this report at Star, the people. It means that some serious journalists here at Nation actually dig
followed
in
that
and
story.
follow and got
Okay.
the document. I was here, I didn't see the document.
All right, okay. Two other big stories that happened this year and that were in court, and one of which was mentioned by Dorothy was the murder trials as concerns Sharon Otieno first. That also had a journalist involved in that particular story. And then secondly, there was a Monica Kimani, there is the Monica Kimani murder case. And the judge actually, on Judge Wakiaga, when he took over the case from Justice Lesit, and he made some very damning statements as regards the media. Where are they getting the information? And it's like basically to the effect that we are prosecuting that case in the headlines. Dorothy, did you think his statements were warranted?
I think, as far as I'm concerned, that was media intimidation. Yeah, because how the media covers its stories is its own business, and it has their agencies that are supposed to criticize it if it steps off the mark, you know. But I don't think that for a judge who is sitting on the bench to make that kind of statement was right. If
he was serious, he would have summoned the reporters and given them a tongue lashing. But going to public said, as he said, is intimidation.
Yes, I think that was intimidation because by the end of the day, journalists do not write the rulings. The rulings are written by judges. Journalists do not testify in court, and a ruling is driven from submissions from the defense and the prosecution side, and whatever has been canvassed in court, and journalists do not do that. So I think that was just intimidation, unless he was telling us, the journalists, we were also going to give you the materials that he was going to use to write the ruling. But so long as that was not going to happen, we took that as intimidation of the media. Okay. Dr. Booker?
I agree with my colleagues. I think I don't have anything to add on that.
Okay, so you, I mean,
what about the judge who said Joey is
the male version of okay, a slave queen, so a woman eater.
So, so you don't think that in that second instance was the what we were treated to was a lot of sensational reporting that shifted attention to the murder and focused a lot more on the suspects. Reason being that one of them, you know, is in the public space as a media personality. So that the way that the media treated the two, in the first instance, I think the fact that, you know, the victim was more or less vulnerable based on her standing in, I mean, as an university student, vis-a-vis this other one that really tended to focus a lot more on, you know, those that were implicated in one way or another, and not so much on the victim. So that for me was the difference.
Okay, and another big story that came out in the Vox Pops was the question of maize. And we've had a lot of scams around the maize, but I want to look at the political statements that have been made around the issue. The Rift Valley rebels, perceived rebels, came out and said, we want the DP investigated for his role in bringing down the maize sector. The perceived loyalists came out in Parliament in the media room and said, these people have been paid by cartels who want to provide fertilizer, if I have my facts correctly, which I believe I do. Dorothy, should we have gone beyond he said, she said, and demanded that these politicians substantiate their claims?
Yes, absolutely. I think substantiation in that instance was absolutely called for, because we are actually entering a very dangerous space where politicians and their acolytes claim persecution, claim being blocked from, you know, attempts to block certain people from taking certain positions in a couple of years, you know. And that, to me, is another instance of media intimidation, you know, that you want to, no, it's also like crying wolf, you know, instead of facing issues as they are, because bad things are happening maize farmers are suffering, that now you have to look over your shoulder and start reading persecution or trying to block a politician from his ambitions. I think that is wrong.
Okay.
It's absolutely wrong, and we have to be on guard against that.
All right, Mutegi, you, as part of your role as a training editor, you also dealt with issues, or rather provided advice on issues to do with libel and defamation.
Yeah.
Is it a risky ground on which we walk when we report verbatim what these politicians say?
You don't report verbatim what a politician says, you report the right thing. I'll give an example. Long ago, there was a politician called Kuguru. He stood in Karatina when Jaragumego Oginga was a candidate for president. And he said, we as Kenyans cannot be ruled by KA. Seriously, when I heard him saying that, the man is from Karatina, I said, the DO who was standing next to him is a Luo. The OCS or SPD were Luos. When he says it cannot be led by Luos or KA, what does that mean? I did not write the story. I refused to write that comment from Kogoro. Standard, they'd write. And they'd ask me, why did you write it? I told him it's rubbish. It is nonsense. You cannot, you just don't repeat, you just say whatever, because fellow said it. No. Use what is right to be written, what's in journalistic, what is of use, what is benefit of people. That's what to publish. That's what to write, not any rap. Politicians want to get the microphone, obviously to say anything. And I think that's what the government was fearing about the live coverage of Odinga's inauguration, that they might talk nonsense. But it's for you, gentlemen and ladies of the media, to shift, get the good stuff, and then publish it.
Okay. Dr. Booker, do you think we're more focused on how sensational the statement is than on the facts of the statement?
I think it depends on which media you're talking about or who the journalist is. Proper training means that you go beyond the sensational statement and, dig out the facts and, interrogate that information before you share it out. But again, because of, the push to get likes and comments and to drive online traffic, there are instances where some of those find space within the media. So yes, it would push the traffic, people would talk about it, but again, it's a risky business to engage in. So it's important that you sift through that information, because publishing it would land you into trouble.
Okay, Eric, did you follow that particular story around the maize and the statements that were made by either side?
Yes, I followed the story, and actually that's one, some of the stories that actually sometimes I read them and I could hide because actually they were wrong, because they're not interrogated.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, even the names of the people who are being mentioned there and the positions were also wrong. So that means that journalists who are covering these stories, they were just going verbatim as they are said by the politicians. They don't interrogate and even check simple things like even the names. I think there is a story that the names of the politicians who was being referred to was wrong, the name of the constituency was wrong. So that tells you that the journalists did not interrogate those statements as they were made by the politicians. So it's always important that, especially a statement that is made by a politician is somebody who is never sincere, especially here in Kenya. So these politicians are not sincere. So any statements that they make is very important that actually they're interrogated and verified and checked by the journalists before they are published.
Okay, and I want to end on this particular subject, on our coverage of Parliament. In the past few days, there's been talk of President Uhuru Kenyatta saying he will not improve their terms of service, and that is in reference to the Parliamentary Service Bill. First of all, have media done justice to Kenyans by explaining what the bill talks about? And then second of all, have we cast the MPs in the role of villain unfairly? I'll start with you, Dorothy.
I think that in the past, they have done a little better than that, especially by just going analytical, especially about comparing the pay of Kenyan MPs with the rest of the world. Perhaps in their mind this time round they think that it's still in the public domain. But I think this is a matter that needs to be kept in the public eye, in the sense that indeed and in fact we are dealing with a very rapacious parliament, both at the national level and at the county level. Just the greed and the reasons for it, you know, are outrageous. For instance, the yarn from the MPs is that we have so many responsibilities, we have to pay fees, we have to pay medical fees, fees for patients and so on. But the question is, who gave them that? Is that in their DJs? In their JDs, you know? It's not in their job descriptions. And it should be their duty to tell the electorate that, look, it's not my duty to pay your medical fees. If you do it just as charity and do it privately. Don't go screaming about it because it is not your duty. What is happening is that they are using people to rob the people, you know, because they are taking more and more. And what I'm waiting for is for the activists, because they are there, all of us have our duties, to lead a huge demonstration to tell the MPs enough is enough. I know, for instance, in Malawi, where one of my legs is, there was a time when the citizenry got so mad with this kind of nonsense that they were stoning MPs as they came out of parliament, you know. They were stoning them, just tell them that you cannot continue robbing us, you know, just to demonstrate that anger, you know. Okay. And I don't know, you may call it hooliganism, but people reach a point where enough is enough, you know. First of all, look at the aid gaps. When somebody is getting $1 million plus and another one is getting 3,000, 10,000, really, is that reasonable?
No, it's not. Okay. Mutegi, do you have a good understanding, based on the press coverage, of what this Parliamentary Services Bill is to do with?
There are certain things we want. We know that. I think it can be reported. That's why you know what they wanted. But they were not reasonable. I think their memories are short. They don't know somebody went there at the Parliament with pigs. And if they want a repeat of that, it can be done.
Okay.
But as for what they want, it's very clear. It is just gluttony.
Gluttony.
Right.
Gluttony.
Dr. Booker, do you think the media has facilitated a good understanding of what the bill contains, or have we been unfair? Because MPs keep saying that the media has been unfair. They're not giving the true details of what we are asking for. Which side of the coin are you on?
Well, of course, they're not going to be happy with the media coverage of it, because it points to, you know, their selfish nature and, you know, their willingness to amass as long as we allow them, you know, to do that. So I wouldn't worry if the MPs are not happy with the media coverage, because it points to a fact that, you know, they're being watched and they're being checked. In the absence of what you'd call a vibrant opposition, the media then, you know, should play that role in checking, and a number of activists also get into, you know, get into political positions these days. So we're not getting very many of them. So in the absence of those players, then the media has an important role to be able to highlight some of those things and hold those that we elect into offices into account. Okay. So we, I think what we're expecting is a lot more coverage around it, and not to worry too much about, you know, the politicians and their reaction to it.
Okay, Eric, bring this conversation to a close.
Yes, I believe that the media has done a good job, and I'm one person who is usually worried when I hear the government and politicians praise the media. It tells you that the media is not doing a good job. But when the media is being bashed left, right, and center by especially those in power, it tells you that the media is doing a good job. Members of Parliament, as much as they may say that they have a job, they have a point to but there's no being ignored by the media. They are the source of all these problems. Because when somebody says that as a member of parliament, you still go and pay medical bills of your constituent, it means that the systems are not working. If this constituent is able to walk to the nearest dispensary or nearest hospital and get medical attention without being told there is no medicine or you need to bribe a doctor for you to be attended to, this constituent will obviously look at the member of parliament as the next person to help. But if the member of parliament can ensure that these hospitals and these dispensaries are working and they have medicine, these people will not bother a member of parliament to pay for their medical bill.
Okay.
So if we want to do that, if the member of parliament want to review their salary, and I heard them, one of them actually had a very good argument. They say that, you know, we are employees and therefore we are entitled to house allowance. But let them now allow us to start interrogating the entire payslip and see how we can review that payslip so that it is also in tandem with the constitution, because they violated the rules and that were given by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. Right. So if they want us to review their salary, let us now sit down and again have a comprehensive review of it. Then we come up with a pay that actually is commiserate with what they do in other sectors.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. So basically, kudos to the media so far on that particular front. So much to cover, so little time. Unfortunately, we have to bring Presspass to a close. Time did fly by. Just two quick responses to our conversation today. Muganda Clay says Kenyans are angry, frustrated by the government and its attendant venal satraps. Kenyans are suffering and look at the media to save them, but when the media are also victims of GOK's high-handedness, they call the media names, and that does not help. And finally, one last response from the Lionheart, who says, I'm sad to say I remember many times I'm bored by the news, so much so that I tune into Nat Geo. The two murders went on headlining for a whole month, yet none could air the story by John Allan. Namu mnatuangusha. Those are just some of your thoughts. Keep sharing your thoughts on social media. The live broadcast might be coming to an end, but the conversation definitely is not. I'm Olive Barrows. Thank you so much to the four of you for making the time, and thank you for watching.